So, with the world of the organizational silo, we're leaning into an unpalatable reality that, whether we like it or not, unless we take steps to actively try to provide a wraparound environment that will reduce the likelihood they occur, they are likely to develop, they are likely to be there. But I'm afraid that's not the end of the unpalatable realities I need to share with you, because the next is coming from the computer. And in many senses, it makes the challenge more difficult. It makes the challenge more difficult, both in terms of silos, if you're responsible for big departments and organizations, but also it's relevant to each and every one of us in relation to being in a silo, being in a team that doesn't particularly want to cooperate with another team as well. And it is tapping into that world, that realm of expectations and belief systems that the computer holds. And this has to be one of the most powerful. And in one guise or another, each and every one of us is going to have our more than our fair share of these, our shoulds and our shouldn'ts. But here's where it's relevant to us in relation to work, specifically around tackling something like the very likely formation of silos, or the way that teams actually function, teams actually behave, versus how we think they should. And of course, there's our first clue. We don't believe this should be happening in the first place. And the narrative that's likely to be present for a great many of us, whether we're CEO or an ordinary member of an ordinary team, is it should not be like this. This should not be happening. They should not be behaving like that, or they should be doing something else. And what that is telling us is that we are unwilling to accept the reality that they are, that it is, and adjust our approach. The narrative, if you like, that it shouldn't be there is the blocker. It stops us being willing to pause and notice that actually that does appear to be the case. So what would we like to do with that? The computer, to put not too fine a point on it, is saying no. It's basically just going, no, does not compute, not willing to go there, not willing to accept. And of course, because that's what it's doing, it's firing up the limbic brain. And let's face it, we all know, we've been here, we've talked about this. Limbic brains are highly opinionated, hugely judgmental, and very much orientated towards preserving their own, or the collective whole, the team's, correctness, rightness, virtuousness, whatever you want to call it. So from this position, changing anything, adapting our approach, being more accommodating, thinking about how we make something more or less likely to happen, just feels unacceptable, because we shouldn't have to. And we, if you like, shortcut straight back to the problem. And it keeps us stuck. Ultimately, we then carry around irritation that we're even having to think about it, but also the opinion gets even greater that we are the ones in the right and they are the ones in the wrong, and why on earth should we do anything that would make their life easier? So the shouldn't dynamic just adds even further complexity and helps us understand even more, with more depth, and hopefully even more clarity, why things like organizational silos are so readily happening, why they are so likely to happen. Because this is the reality of what happens for us internally. And it is an incredibly powerful blocker for making any adjustments or any changes, because we have already decided that they shouldn't be a thing in the first place, and therefore we shouldn't have to. Now I'm going to move now to a space that is possibly slightly more relevant to more of you. After all, very few of us would be in a position where we are the ones worrying about our organizational silos. I wanted to talk about them and show you how they happen, because I think they help really illustrate some of the challenges with what I'd like to talk to you about next. Only this typically is perhaps slightly smaller. It will be happening closer to home, if you like, and it probably happens more often. Certainly from the time that I've spent in organisations, the concept of collaborative working is definitely on the rise. And again, when we consider that we've got very lean teams and the minimum number of people needed to do various different things, if you really want to get the best out of the folks you've got, you are going to need to encourage them to share their resources and their expertise across departmental lines in a way that perhaps you didn't have to in the past, because that's what's going to help you find solutions for the way forward. So we're going to talk now a little bit about collaborative working. But before we do, the one thing I would really like you to just pause and notice is that concept of sharing resources, sharing expertise, sharing knowledge with folks out with your normal team environment. And yes, the fact that we should be able to do that easily, seamlessly, and happily, well, that's a hugely human viewpoint. And of course, rationally, it makes sense. It clearly is the most rational, sensible way of sharing resources and making sure that everyone's pulling together in the same direction. Problem is, from a limbic perspective, it's a little more of the challenge, as we now know. So let's remind ourselves of David Rock's SCARF model and just take a peek at this in relation to collaborative working to better understand the size of the challenge. Well, first up, and actually one of my personal favourites, is status, particularly when it comes to collaborative working, because whilst I might know exactly where I stand within my team, I might know that I'm the expert, for example, in a particular field, or I'm the quickest or the best at doing something, or I'm really smart in that one space and I feel hugely expert. That's not to say that's how I'm going to feel when I go and work in this other area, on this new project with new people. What if they're better at it than me? What if they're smarter than me? What if they don't listen to me? What if one of them is superior to me, is of a higher ranking and therefore has more authority than me, more control? What if? The risks around status for collaborative working are likely to be sizable. And that's before we think about, what does it mean that I'm working on this particular project? Is it a good thing? Is it beneficial? Or actually, is it not very desirable? Is it something that I've been put on when there was something more exciting over there that other people are doing? Working on anything new is, of course, going to generate a sense of uncertainty, particularly as quite often in collaborative projects, the definition of what is being done isn't necessarily as well defined or well formed as many would like it to be. Sometimes the goals aren't particularly clear, nor are the timeframes or the budget or anything else for that matter. And so there is often huge uncertainty that goes with any new project. And when you wrap that into uncertainty around who these other people are and what they're like and what they're expecting and so on, you can see how certainty takes a real hit here. Autonomy may or may not be impacted. This is very much going to depend on whether this is a voluntary thing or not. But assuming that folks have been told they are on a new project team, or they have been told to go and collaborate with another team, you can be fairly sure autonomy is likely to feel like it has taken a negative hit, and that individual is now having to do something either against their will or against their better judgment. Relatedness, of course, is going to be a challenge here. You wouldn't necessarily know other members of this new collaborative workforce, or you may have heard about them and maybe it's not great. So potentially relatedness going along with status and being a little bit of a challenge or an issue here. And then, of course, it may be relevant, it may not. That concept of fairness is likely to wrap in at some point, because whether or not things have been handled fairly so far is going to be relevant for folks. So those are all the risks you can see that come with a potential piece of collaborative work for the average person. Now, in the extra resources this time around, I'm going to talk about how you might mitigate some of those because I don't have time here. But what I'm hoping is you're now beginning to get an understanding of why collaborative work sometimes doesn't go particularly well, and why I think it's a sublimely human idea, but it's very often the limbic chimp that ends up having to deal with it, and why so often it can all go horribly wrong and get a little bit emotionally messy. Now, if you want to use any of these concepts in your working world, here are some thoughts and ideas about how you might go about doing that. At the very lightest touch, just to observe, notice dynamics. It's fascinating what you'll discover. If you're actively involved in anything where this might be going on right here, right now, then listen to understand concerns and areas that seem to be causing discords. That can be massively useful to you. Or you could explore what the thing would look like, the situation looks like when you use the limbic lens, when you view it through the lens of a chimp. Does it make more sense? And is that helpful to you? So some ideas as to how you might use some of this info for your working world. Also, if you are going to dive into the resource pack, there's going to be more. I'm going to pick apart Scarf for you for a slightly deeper dive, and also then take each of the elements and talk about how you might go about mitigating risk and start building a sense of at least minor comfort, rebuilding some of that security and safety. And also the concept of building a new group for your new collaborative working group. Next week, we're going to continue on this sort of thread of exploring the reality of what we're likely to face into at work through our three different lenses: human, chimp, and computer. And we're going to be talking about hierarchy, bosses, and bother. Things are sure to get wild out there, and I do hope you'll join me then.